Now, Make-A-Wish Ireland are excited to announce a new family cycling event to run up until the end of August. The charity is asking the public to join ambassador and professional cyclist Nicholas Roche in cycling 250 kilometres during the month in order to raise funds to help grant wishes to seriously ill children. Participants can take part by bike, scooter, wheelchair or any set of wheels and log their kilometres over the course of the month while encouraging friends and families to sponsor them. Those who raise over €250 will receive their very own custom medal. People can enter the challenge themselves, by the way, with their families, or also in small teams of friends or work colleagues as well. So plenty of ways to get involved, and those wishing to get involved in Wheels for Wishes can sign up now at makeawish.ie. It's a brilliant initiative, brilliant charity, and I'm delighted to say that Nicholas Roche is with us on the line. Good morning to you, Nicholas.
Good morning.
How are you getting on? How's life watching the Tour de France rather than being in it?
I have to admit, it's not as easy as I thought it would be. Well, the first few days when I was seeing everyone crashing left, right, and centre, I was quite happy I was watching it from the social. But the Tour is the Tour. It's always something special. It wasn't a surprise. It was something that was planned from the team. So from the start of the year, I know I wasn't programmed for the Tour. So the disappointment or the strategy of the team meant that it was not going to happen. And but still, although I knew about it, I was still waiting for some random email to pop in with my flight details. But that's the way it is. I'm looking forward to preparing the Olympics. I've been focusing on that, and that's also one of the reasons and the strategies of the team. So I'm trying to make the most of it.
Right. I was just going to ask, what were the other factors at play then in that decision that led to you not cycling in the Tour? So the Olympics was a big part of it.
Well, the Olympics was a big part, but it was also a gamble because, the selection was only made a couple of weeks, if not days ago. So when the team planned the whole calendar back in December, so some teams leave it until the selection point and they give you really, really on the last minute your qualification for the Tour or not. Like it's been, for example, like in AG Tour, if you remember in my first Tour, I got the call on the Monday morning after winning the championships on the Sunday that I was heading off to the Tour. This team works very differently. This team already tells you more or less in December your program, so as you can prepare accordingly to it. So the program was, they've signed Romain Bardet, a new GC rider for the team, and me being more a rider specifically adapted to be in support of these guys. He wanted to ride the Giro and the Tour of Spain, so the team prioritized me to be there in support of him in the Tour of Italy rather than in the Tour. This year's DSM Tour de France team is more orientated around the sprints. They have a full sprint train and they wanted to give their young, promising climber, Donovan, a go in the mountains and a bit of an experience. So I paid the price of that kind of strategy.
That's interesting. It doesn't leave much room for manoeuvre if you get into a good bit of form, for example, during the Giro, or do they leave that wiggle room for you?
No, they don't. There's teams that might. This one, like I said, is pretty. The good thing about it is once the plan is done, they stick to the plan.
Okay.
Unless something major happened, but I wasn't actually even in the reserve list for the Tour. And one of the other factors was that I was really, really pushing to go to the Olympics. And that was something that the team wasn't quite ready. It was also part of the choices. So it's multiple things that make you have to make choices. And for me, at this stage in my career, the most important thing, I wanted to have another shot at the Olympics, go and represent Ireland for the fourth time. I thought that, I've done 11 tours or 10 tours, but I wanted just to give it a last. I could maybe do another Tour de France in my career, but there's fewer chances of me going to the Olympics again. So I really, really wanted to push myself and try and qualify or be selected for the Olympics and represent Ireland one more time.
Yeah, it's this amazing thing, I presume, and an amazing difference to one of, or any of the Grand Tours, really, going out representing your country. A less commercial event, obviously, for you, I presume, but still this unbelievably proud thing. So can you describe those differences between being an Olympic cyclist and obviously being a cyclist in the peloton at a Grand Tour?
Well, I was listening last night to one of Eddie Dunbar's interviews that he's done recently, or it was a press release, and he was saying, when he speaks to the people back home in Ireland and say, I rode the Giro, which was huge for him as a first Grand Tour, Actually, so did I back in 2007. People is like, oh, what's the Giro? When you say I go to the Olympics, everyone knows what the Olympics are. In cycling, people would relate cycling to the Tour de France, and that's about it, where everyone can relate to the Olympics. So I think in the world of cycling, the Olympics is not as important as the Tour or one of the other Grand Tours. And this is the full-on proof, is a lot of teams are actually not really happy that some of the riders are going to the Olympics, to the point where even some of the teams have banned riders of going to the Olympics because they said that the importance is to stick to the calendar the team has imposed them. I'm talking about, the bigger riders. It was publicly said, for example, Alaphilippe, his team did not agree on him and going on the Olympics, and he had to prepare for the second part of the year. So there are circumstances involved where, if you talk to the grand picture, to the grand media and the public, the Olympics remains one of the biggest events on the planet.
Yeah, for sure. So can we get into your emotions when you're watching on Saturday in particular, Nico? Like, I mean, this is extraordinary. If you just talk about that first crash, what was going through your head when you witnessed what had happened in terms of that sign being held out and the entire peloton just collapsing?
Well, unfortunately, I think cycling has quite a short-term memory, and this has happened in the past. This time around was just bigger again. Many times I've been caught up in a crash because of a dog, and the same in the peloton, or someone stepping out with a camera phone, and there's 5 guys crashing, 10 guys crashing. This time around, it was the way the road was narrow, and the circumstances of the actual, that it was proper high speed at that moment, well, made that it was a proper disaster. I'm actually surprised that what is happening this year, that the Tour is gonna take legal actions, has not happened in the past. Because if you think about it, for example, I take a very personal example. My own teammate who's abandoned, Yasha Suttling. So he's also a rider who is out of contract at the moment and has played and was extremely happy to go to the Tour, because he knows that this could be a ticket into a team next year, or a ticket into re-signing with this team. So he's been preparing for months for this contract. Now he's home with a broken hand after one day into Tour de France. So what does that mean on his contract? It's great that they're going to sue her 15,000 euros, but my mate might lose a couple of 100,000 euros for this crash because of his age, because of the circumstances, because there's no races. There wasn't too many races before the Tour de France, and there's not too many races after Tour de France, and it's still a short time for him to go into the Vuelta. So people think, oh yeah, it's a crash, blah, 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 blah. But no, actually, we play or in a way our lives or our career on certain events. And unfortunately, that's the case of Yasha, but it's also the case of a lot of the other riders. If you look at it, the other days, there was also incidents with just riders themselves. It's just the Tour is a Tour. There's always these crashes every single year. Last year, it was due to the bad weather in Nice. The year before is the stress of the crosswinds. But there's always something happening in the Tour, and that's the beauty and the stress of the Tour. You know that if you go to the Tour, what's important is to go through at least the first 4 or 5 days kind of unscratched or unwounded.
Will the cycling authorities listen to people like you, to any of the other cyclists talking? Will they look at the protest the other day and say, right, we need to change something here?
Well, yes and no, but what do? You can't really barrier the whole course. So, if you're in a stadium, it's easy. You just put a fence the way they've done in football pitches to stop the public jumping on the stadium, on the grass. But in the cycling races, they've already, in the last 2-3K of the climbs, they put barriers, but it doesn't stop people doing what they want, the 100K or whatever the distance is beforehand. So it's a little bit more complicated with just the structure of the race. For sure, I think if you start using someone as an example, and I think this lady will be an example, people might actually think of being a little bit more cautious, because until now, you see them running beside you, pushing you. Nibali also crashed down and abandoned, was it last year or the year before, because of a spectator on his camera. So every year there's an incident with a spectator that is big or small. So I think at this point, if we have a clear example, and it's like, all right, this is what's going to happen if you mess about, I think the public will eventually, it's going to take time. It's not going to happen between here and the Alps or here in the Pyrenees. you will still see people taking risks to get a shot on TV in some crazy costume. But I think people will get educated towards it, but it's going to take time. Like I said, unfortunately, as much as the organizers want, it's very difficult to put barriers everywhere.
Well, what's going through your head when you're making one of these big climbs and you see one of those people in a crazy costume, those people trying to get on TV? Because this is obviously the most famous moments when we see somebody invariably running beside one of the GC contenders. What do you think as a member of the peloton at that moment?
What an idiot! But no, I mean, when you're racing for victory, you're focused, so you're trying to not think about it, but it still is there, and you're just saying, please don't get closer, please don't get closer, please don't get closer, and you're kind of also focusing on the pace that's in front of you or behind you, or the riders around you in general. So it takes a lot of focus, but also a lot of distraction, and you're just kind of basically hoping that nothing happens. Because at that moment, if he trips or if he goes close to you, or sometimes when he tries to push you and he pushes you, like we've seen even in Zoncolan, where the guy wanted to push the rider and he touched the wheel of the rider in front of him and fell, and it cost him the victory. That was back in 2014. But it was quite dramatic. The poor kid, he was on his way to win the Zoncolan, and the fan tries to push him and slips, and it makes him touch the wheel of the guy in front. There was two of them. And then eventually he just completely clipped out, and the other guy just rode off and won a stage of the Giro. So I think we're one of the only sports where the fan interaction can actually have a significant change of the course of the race.
And then the other question I had was, what's going through your mind when you're in a situation like the one we saw on Saturday, for example, when you're in the middle of the bunch and you realise that this whole thing could go down like a pack of Skittles?
Yeah, so when you're on the ground, there's not much you can think about, and you try and assess your wounds and hope that is not bad enough that you can start again. So the first reflex is like, you know, when you try and get up. I imagine if you said I'm in the middle, I have a couple of guys or bike on top of me, so I'll try and kind of firstly assess if anything's broken, if I can move, concussion, no concussion, and then first reflex is usually you look for your bike and see if the bike is decent enough to try and go again. There's a moment where you know already if you're going to save the day and it's going to be a couple of minutes, or you know that's it, it's going to be 10, 15, 5 minutes or whatever it is. So kind of after a short time, you realize that, okay, that's it. That's, if I was a GC rider, you'd say, okay, that's it. I'm out of GC for now. I'm just going to save and try and get to the line as quick as possible. Or on the opposite, I'm completely out, and then riders will sit up and try and make it in the easiest way possible to the line, and think about getting ready already for the next day and not putting more pressure to the body.
Nico, that level of detail is amazing, I think, and it really helps people understand just how dangerous the fan interaction can be and how catastrophic it can be. Even the example you used earlier on of your teammate and the broken hand. In the context of that, Irish cycling fans have been very interested to see the row that has broken out between Sam Bennett and his team director. For you, watching something like that, what's that experience like as somebody who's in the peloton, watching somebody who you know have a very public evisceration from his boss?
Yeah, I think it's quite new, or if it's not new, it's been probably since Kelly and my dad's time that we didn't hear, and I think maybe not because they would have kept things secret rather than have it so much in the media. So I think for Irish cycling fans or general public, because I think Sam today is more than a cycling star, he's a proper star in Ireland. So everything he says or does has just taken that more importance, and people just got more interested in the sport and in Sam as a character himself. To be honest, I only know what I read on the newspaper, and I've just seen these back and forth between accusations from Quickstep and Sam trying to justify himself on his initial pain and then on getting back into training. So it's very difficult with the elements that I have to kind of judge, but it is quite, I was going to say, interesting to see this clear accusation. And then, you know, was it Was it a decision that took him out of the Tour? But we also don't know if Sam really wanted to go on the Tour in these conditions. So there's a lot of unknowns in there. It's not just about two people having an argument. They could be, if you're not 100%, the Tour is the most brutal race of the year. Do you want to go? So I think that was a question that might have gone through Sam's head. But on the other hand, if you wanted to go and your team boss is not happy, it's also sometimes a game. Plus, that there's all these rumors of changing teams and all that. So there's a lot of politics involved. I have been taken off a Tour team because I wouldn't sign a contract to renew and I was leaving the team. So they just told me, I'm not going to put you in the Tour. So I know this scenario exists. So there's a lot of scenarios that exist. There's a lot of politics sometimes involved. It's not just about being strong and being capable of riding the Tour. And the teams make choices, but also riders, when they're strong enough, as in power-wise, they can also make choices. So I think for now it's still in the hot, and no one really knows, apart Sam and Lefebvre, what is really going on.
And is this common? Are we just aware of this story because it's Sam Bennett, or is it frequent that like a team director would go so public with such, like, in Ireland, the whole notion of accusing somebody of faking injury is very important, because that's what Roy Keane said happened to him in Saipan. So it's ringing a lot of bells for people, this story. But does it happen in other teams to the star rider from France or Spain? Is the situation unusual, I suppose, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with you. It is very rare that it goes so public. You can always make, sometimes there's some kind of an illusion to it, or is not really said in such a direct way. But this time around, it is quite rare that the accusations are so straightforward. I don't remember. Okay, maybe it's the same. I'm also Irish cycling, Irish fan. I follow Sam since years, so maybe I'm more interested in the story because I follow Sam than if it was some random rider from a different team. But exactly what you're saying, I don't think it's something that happened that often. I don't recall any scenarios that were as vocal as this conflict over the last couple of years.
If Sam had been fully fit, do you think that he would have been in consideration for the Olympics team, or because of the course, was it always part of his plan really not to be part of the Olympics this year as well?
Well, that's the same. I talked with Sam last year, and I think at some point he had considered it. And then I think he was looking at the Tour, and there's a lot of things in for the Olympic, in the Tour, but then there's also all these races behind. So like I said, unfortunately for us, the Olympics is right in the middle of the season and at the peak of the season. So, in most sports, you go to Olympics and then that's it. It's 4 years work. You get to it and your time's off for a couple of months, a couple of weeks, and you can relax. Where for us, going to the Olympics requires quite some sacrifice in the preparation. So you would have to skip races before that. And also in the coming back, which means that it affects some of the other races coming after the Olympics, especially when a couple of months ago, the quarantine for Japan was over than 10 days. So this was a moment where a lot of the riders were kind of backing off, because how can you prepare for an Olympic race in the middle of July, doing 10 days in a hotel room, when you have to go back to the peak of the season when everyone's in altitude camps and riding the Tour de France, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a lot of questions going in people's mind on, is it worth going to the Olympics or is it not worth going to the Olympics? Because to be honest, the Olympic medal is obviously achievable for everyone, but there's always realistically only a handful of riders who can say, I'm going to Olympics to win it. I'm going to Olympics to try and win it, but some riders are going there with a higher chance. And I think I wouldn't be surprising anybody. There is superstars in cycling. I'm going to go there, do my best, give my best for Ireland, represent the country as best as I can, but there are stronger riders. And so it's like, where do you place yourself along in the priority? For me, it was a priority. For Sam, was it a priority, knowing that the course is extremely difficult? But also not just the course is difficult, the situation of going to the Olympics, the loss of days of training pre the event, but also the traveling there and traveling back and racing straight afterwards. For example, most likely after the Olympics, I would be racing 3 days after the Olympics in Spain. not at the Vuelta, another race in Spain. So the show goes on after the Olympics. So I'm not quite sure if Sam wanted to go, didn't want to go. A bit with the Tour. I haven't spoken to Sam openly about it since, so I can't really comment for him. But yes, I think the Olympic course would have been difficult for Sam. But then, did he want to go or not want to go? Because he also, it would have been also maybe an experience for him to try the Olympics. So definitely, I think for Paris, it'll be an amazing Olympics for him, and I see him one of the favorites for the Olympics in Paris. So, like I said, there's a lot of strategies going on, and I haven't had a conversation with Sam in a while now about it. So I don't know his point of view. I'm just kind of guessing around.
Really interesting.
I have one last question, and sorry, go on. Yeah.
No, go for it, Ger.
Well, my last question was about that relationship between the cyclist and his team and the international team. It seems it's a little bit like international football, where the teams don't really want you riding in, I don't know, maybe they do want the World Championships, but in the Olympics, because as far as I can make out, they still have to pay you guys, but they don't actually get their sponsors tag emblazoned on the national shirt. So is it that kind of relationship where there's a bit of tension? We don't really want you doing international stuff because we pay your wages week in, week out?
Well, in cycling is quite different because, international races will be just basically the World Championships. And now, since the last couple of years, the European Championships were sometime in August. The Olympics, obviously, it's once every 4 years. I agree with you a little bit. Just it's not about the pay salary. It's more about the risk of crashing. And the team paying you if you crash on an event for Ireland, for example. So if I go to the Olympics and smash myself and my season's over, I'm racing for Ireland, not for my team, and my team still has to pay me. So it's kind of a risk assessment more than anything else.
Really interesting. So when do you fly out, Nicholas? I presume it's because it's like one of the first events always, isn't it? So like the 24th,
yeah,
I think is.
So we'll be flying out on the 18th and 19th. Of July, so pretty soon.
You're hoping, I presume, that you're up against all Tour de France worn out cyclists.
Well, once again, it depends on the teams. Like a lot of there's a few riders who are in the Tour. I don't think there's that many. Right. But look, on a personal note, one of the races where I always had one of my best performances was San Sebastian, which is the week after the Tour. So I guess this is the same timing as San Sebastian in a normal year. So a lot of riders come out of the Tour in different ways. There's riders who a week after get like a overcompensation and a peak of form, and there are riders who just on the opposite just go down. So the Tour is a 50-50. If you look once again at the example of San Sebastian, which would be exactly the same scenario as what's going on this year between Tour and Olympics, in the top 10 in San Sebastian, most likely there's 7 or 8 riders that are out of the Tour. So I reckon the Olympics might be similar. So sometimes it plays in your favor, but I played in the favor for me the last couple of years when I went to the Tour, but also know riders who come out of the Tour and just takes them that bit more time. And maybe that the real tiredness kicks back after 10 days, not after 1 week, because your body just keeps on going. It's a funny machine, and they all react even year to year in a different way, because obviously there was years when I was leader where you go a little bit more deeper than when you're a teammate, because obviously when you're a teammate, the last climb you recover and you think about the next day. So every year is different, every rider is different, and every scenario is different. So it's kind of funny to see how some riders can actually get the strongest day a week after the Tour, and some riders probably have their worst day a week after the Tour. So it's going to be interesting in the Olympics. I still think riders who have ridden the Tour will have an advantage just because of the rhythm. There is no race in the world, no training in the world that can replicate the workload you're getting in the Tour de France.
Right. Well, very best of luck with it. Just a reminder that Make-A-Wish Ireland are excited to announce a new family cycling event to run up until the end of August. The charity is asking the public to join ambassador and professional cyclist Nicholas Roche in cycling 250 kilometres during the month in order to raise funds to help grant wishes to seriously ill children. Those wishing to get involved in Wheels for Wishes can sign up now at makeawish.ie. Nicholas Roche, great as ever to chat to you. Best of luck in Tokyo. We'll chat to you again soon.
Thanks,
Cheers.